G'day, what an amazing day for Oliver Bearman. Thought he was going to be racing F2, ends up qualifying for Formula 1 in a Ferrari. Let me run through the timeline today. I was out shooting the F1 Academy girls who were on the other side of the track, and I get this message on my phone from Michael Potts, a fellow photographer. Carlos Sainz is out, appendicitis. So I immediately go to the Ferrari Instagram page. Yes, it's confirmed, he will not be driving. So I race back to the paddock. I head straight back to the Ferrari hospitality suite, and I, along with a whole host of photographers, are standing there waiting for young Ollie to come out. We weren't 100% sure that he was actually in there though. 35 minutes later, Oliver appeared, ended up going and having a chat with Jock Clear. Now Jock is the senior Ferrari driving coach. He's worked with both Carlos and Charles. They chatted for a number of minutes and then he headed across to the garage. Luckily, he headed straight towards me, resulting in some nice images. So I went round to the garage to see what was happening out there. Big media contingent, obviously interested in what he was doing. Turns out he was doing his 7-second extraction test. What is that? Well, every driver must be able to prove to the FIA that they can get out of their car and replace their steering wheel in 7 seconds. How was this timed? Simply on an iPhone. After that he was weighed, along with his helmet and hands device, and then he was given the thumbs up by the FIA that he could actually take part in FP3. Now the signage above the garage was still reading Carlos Sainz 55. The 55 on this little counter was still the same, but they had Carlos's name off the car and Oliver's on within probably 10 minutes of the announcement being made. By the time FP3 came about, they'd changed the numbers on the car, and there were a number of different numbers to change, and above the car they'd changed the 55 to 38. And why didn't he use the number he races for in F2? Because that's number 3, taken by Daniel Ricciardo. There are regular fan zone appearances that each team has to do, but today it fell just before FP3, and obviously Ollie had special exemption not to go, so only Charles went out to that commitment. Now for those wondering, what about his race suit, his boots, his underwear and that sort of thing, all custom done? Well, that goes from race to race in a bag for every reserve driver, and of course hardly ever used. But of course in instances like this, it's invaluable that this is all done ahead of time. Before I get to his performance in FP3, let's talk quickly about what he has done in his past racing career. Yes, at the moment he's racing with Prema in Formula 2 alongside teammate and Mercedes prospect Kimi Antonelli. He finished 6th last year in the F2 Championship and currently is 19th of 22 after the first race this year. And unfortunately for him, missing this race is going to do him some harm in his attempt to win that F2 Championship this year. But when you step into a Formula 1 car and quali and a race, I think you have to put that behind you. He was the second car to head out in FP3. He got about 40 minutes of running, and then Jeddah Corniche had a big crash, and that saw the track closed, red flagged for, I'm guessing, about 10 minutes. And then he went out. At that stage, I think I looked and he was probably 17th in the timing sheets. But in those last 10 minutes, he put in a run that saw him finish 10th, which I thought was a fair effort, given he stepped in at the last minute. I can tell you his father's here, David. I had a chat with him tonight. Lovely fellow, and he told me they only got the word about an hour before we found out. And of course, he had plenty to do in that time. Mum's not here, and his brother, who's 14, is racing go-karts today, and I think it was in Campanos. So Dad's a bit conflicted. He's got a son racing for his first quali session in F1, and he's got another son racing in Campanos. And Dad was the first person to greet Ollie when he came out of the garage after that practice session. I did have a chat to one of the guys from Hinsa and said, look, what's he going to feel like after this weekend? And he said, well, there's a huge difference in power and braking levels between F1 and F2, so he's going to be sore probably in his neck. He's going to feel it, definitely. But typically these guys are so well trained that it's not going to be debilitating, whilst it might be annoying. About 25 minutes before the start of qualifying, I went out and waited for Oliver to enter the garage, and he came off that deck bouncing and headed to the garage, and then I went around the front, and I couldn't believe it that they'd done the signage above his garage with, yes, his picture and his name and the name in Arabic font. And then it was out on track for the young Brit. He survived Q3, but unfortunately was bumped out in Q2, but finished 11th. An amazing effort considering he had such little time in the car. I waited for him outside of the FIA garage. He came out, he was bubbly, he did the media pen, and then he did some Sky Sports interviews before catching up with his father, who gave him a well-earned hug. He then made his way back to the hospitality suite, where he was greeted with great enthusiasm by his own crew. Was he nervous? Well, he said that he didn't have time to get nervous. But no one can argue about his performance. It was admirable considering the precious little time he spent actually in the car prior. One man who could be unhappy, but perhaps won't even care, is Lewis Hamilton, because he could well have been the first British driver to race for Ferrari in some 25 years. He's lost that chance though, because it looks like Oliver Bearman will be that first British driver in 25 years. And who was the last Brit? It was Eddie Irvine, and just before that, Nigel Mansell. Here's some other stats that might interest you. He's the first driver to make his F1 debut for Ferrari since Arturo Mazzario in 1972. Oliver won the F4 series in both Italy and Germany in 2021. The same year he joined Ferrari Driver Academy at the age of just 16. In October last year, he drove an F1 car for the first time at a private test at Fiorano with Ferrari. He stepped into the Haas of Kevin Magnussen in Mexico last year, and there were actually 4 other young rookie drivers in that test, and he topped all of their times. He's the youngest British person to drive an F1 car. His boyhood hero is Jenson Button, and tonight I imagine he'll find it very tricky to get a good night's sleep. Now on the Carlos front, he's got appendicitis, and he's going to, as I understand it, have to have that operated on here because you can't fly if you've got appendicitis. I did think he looked rather uncomfortable yesterday when he arrived at the track late. Of course, it's sad for Carlos. He has things to prove, but it is an unequalled opportunity for Oliver. Now, there's only one thing I'll ask of you. Could you please subscribe? About half of you have not. If you have subscribed, and if you haven't subscribed, how about hitting the like button for me too? And for a whole host of extra content, have a look there. There's plenty to discover. Thanks for watching, and stay passionate. What else can I tell you? Thank you, Mark.
My pleasure, Ken.
I don't know whether... Yeah, there's Mark Sutton. Crazy Mark Sutton.